Formula One on 5 Live.
Hello and welcome to Austin, Texas. We're sitting in the F1 paddock. A gentle breeze. We've managed to find some shade because it's still quite hot. We had incredible temperatures in Qatar a couple of weekends ago, and here we are expecting a little bit of fall, a little bit of autumnal vibes, but it's not to be. But never mind, we're ready for the race weekend. I'm joined by former Formula One driver Jolyon Palmer, racing driver Alice Powell, and the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. I've got the full crew here. I'm feeling great. You loving Austin, Jolyon?
I'm loving life, Rosanna.
Oh, this
is great. What a time to be alive, sitting in Austin.
You have that aura about you.
Yeah, this is vintage. Formula One weekend. It's going to be packed out still. The Americans are loving it, and it's a cool city, cool track. We're in a nice bit of shade, gentle breeze.
Flowers behind you, of
course.
course.
It's just brilliant.
Look at that
Everything's
for a
coming together.
Pretty as a picture,
Yeah.
Jolyon Palmer, loving life. Can anyone top that right now?
Andrew,
come on.
Andrew, we all look to Andrew for some
Austin
reason.
tops the lot almost. It's right up there with the best races on the calendar. As Jolyon said, it's a fantastic city. This is the hottest it's ever been here. I've been here, I've turned up in Austin when it's been like frosty at night. I've had a hurricane here, and now it's going to be 35 Celsius tomorrow for qualifying, which is just unheard of at this time of year. And I was speaking to a guy at the hire car desk at the airport yesterday. He says this is the coolest it's been for 5 months here. So they've obviously had quite the summer in Austin, but it's just a great place to be. Everybody loves it here. It's sort of, it's become one of the highlights of the season. And Lewis Hamilton was saying in the press conference today, a lot of these new tracks, they're not like the classic tracks. This one was an instant classic, and that's what it feels like.
And actually all the drivers come into the paddock puffed up, wearing some cool kit. They're all loving a bit of barbecue, even though they're having to watch their weight. Alice, you partial to a bit of brisket?
Yeah.
You went at the
for
team dinner last night. I know you were otherwise engaged, but are you ready to take on a bit of the Mexican cuisine here, a little bit of
I'm up
tacos?
for trying anything, Rosanna.
Okay,
But
good.
Benny's in charge of the dinner reservations, so we'll see where we end up.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not as hot as Qatar as well, which is a big bonus.
Yeah, we will come on to that. Jolyon, you said it's another sort of traditional weekend. It's not really vintage, sorry, I think you said. Sprint weekend again.
Well, there is that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One way to bring it down.
I don't know. I think
I don't mind them, to be honest.
Yeah, I think they're sort of. What is it? Sprint number 5 for the year now, and we had one just last weekend. I think we're just getting used to the sprints a little bit more. It does mean that there's more relevant action through a weekend. I still think, given the choice, I'd rather have a conventional weekend, but it's not really the big debate that it used to be in my mind. It's here to stay, clearly, and it's all right. I think we've been lucky as well with the sprints that we've had recently because they've been different enough from the Grand Prix. If you think of Qatar last time out, it was a few safety cars. You had Piastri at the front. Spa was obviously a bonkers sprint with the weather, and you had Piastri at the front for a little bit, and Gasly came through for a podium. So I think they've just had it just nicely mixed up through the elements recently. So it'll be interesting to see if it's back to normal conditions, one where that leads us to for the Grand Prix. I don't mind it anymore.
Still loving life, just love it. Of course, so it is a sprint weekend. No more debate on whether we have sprints or not. But in terms of other debates, we now have a world champion, Max Verstappen. That debate is over.
Was it ever started?
I know. But what would you say to people now to continue tuning into Formula One? Why should they watch for the rest of the season? I want an answer from each of you.
Well, first of all, it's not any less predictable now the championship's over than it was before the championship was over. Max Verstappen's still going to win every race. The best driver in
No,
the
we're
best
trying to
car.
rev it up, Andrew. We want people to listen to
So
us.
if you were watching it before, there's no reason to stop watching it now just because the championship's over. But the main thing to say is that a Grand Prix is a Grand Prix. It's got that name for a reason. It matters. Every Grand Prix matters, even if there's not a world championship at stake. A Grand Prix victory matters. It's the reason we count them. Max has not just won 3 world championships now. He's about to win probably this weekend his 50th Grand Prix. That's going to put him 1 behind Alain Prost, a couple more behind Sebastian Vettel. He's, those numbers that Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton racked up, which we thought were never going to be beaten. Verstappen's coming for them, and the numbers count. The fact that Charles Leclerc's only won 5 Grand Prix, that matters to him. So don't tell me it's not important. They're all important.
And if you were watching them before, you might as well just keep watching them.
What's keeping you coming back for more, Jamie?
Well, okay. This Grand Prix is a good one.
Apart from some obvious factors.
This Grand Prix is a good one. We've had some great races here. It's a nice racetrack that can provide good racing. And the sprint, maybe... Having only 1 hour of practice is probably the biggest thing about the sprint that can mix up the weekend. Mexico's an unpredictable one with the high altitude. Brazil is always a great race. And then we got Vegas, which is a complete unknown. Huh?
Sprint in Brazil.
Yeah, so we got 2 great races in Brazil. But, in Brazil we had George Russell beat Verstappen last year, and even Red Bull might be under a bit of pressure in some of these races. So I'm sure Max is going to be the one to beat in all of them. But I don't reckon they're going to have it easy in all of these races. I think there's still hopefully going to be some nice fights.
So in a way, we're lucky that the calendar plays out how it does at this point.
Or we're unlucky that the great races are at the end of the season. We wanted them earlier on.
Shake them up, bring them forward. Alice, why are you getting excited about the rest of the 2023 season?
Second place is still up for grabs. Lewis Hamilton's hunting down Perez. But I'm quite interested to see how it goes down at McLaren for these remainder of the races, because Oscar's, I think it's out of the last 6 races, he's out-qualified Lando in 4 of them, something like that. And we saw Lando at Qatar, a bit edgy on the radio. He's not really had any pressure, has he, Lando, or consistent pressure in Formula One so far. So I'm looking forward to seeing how, for the remainder of the season, how that plays out. And Oscar loves sprint race weekends, doesn't we? And we've got one this weekend and obviously at Brazil as well.
So and if there's going to be another winner, there's another non-Red Bull winner, if either of those McLaren guys win, they'll be the first-time Grand Prix winner, which will be a nice story at the end of the year.
You sold it to me. I'll keep coming back for more.
Well, you better.
We'd miss you if you didn't.
Oh, thanks very much. Okay, so plenty to still look forward to in the 2023 season. As I said, Max Verstappen now coming into this race weekend as a 3-time world champion. The chatter is over, the debate is over. I mean, I've run out of superlatives, adjectives. I've kind of run out of questions to ask him as well. If you were in the media pen now, what would you be asking him, Jalen?
Me too. Well, I think everyone's run out. So I was asked for F1. It was this time last year. Max won the title, and they did a couple of questions. Can I answer? What's Max's best race? Where does this rank him? And then I got asked again this year. It was pretty much the same questions. I'm like, well, kind of the same answer. He's won everything. Where do I rank him? A little bit more than last year, but you do end up saying it every weekend. Superb. He's flawless a lot of the time. Even though, there's a couple of things that he had when he was younger, coming through before he was a champion, where he's a little rough around the edges and occasionally could be a bit hot-headed. That's not the case anymore. And I think when there's no big rival, he's just the finished article right now, and he's blitzing the field every weekend.
And some people try and throw a bit of jeopardy into the mix, Andrew, and say, well, reliability, but the car's also been bulletproof pretty much.
Yeah, look, he's been brilliant this year, and so have Red Bull, and they're fully deserving champions. But what they need is competition, as Jolien said. It'll be interesting to see how long. It may well be the case that this is the Max Verstappen we're going to see for the next 10 years or however long he stays in Formula One. But the last time he was challenged, that this is not the Max Verstappen that was on track. It was a very, very different one, and he's been able to operate in a comfort zone this year. And I think everybody in the sport, probably even including him, is hoping that next year someone can up their game and move him out of that zone.
It was interesting because at the start of last year he was challenged by Leclerc was leading the championship. Ferrari had the best car for a while, and he was still very calm in the fight. There was never really a risk of those two coming together, and he already looked like he was composed, having that first title under his belt. Now he's got 2 and then 3. You'd expect that to be the case again. The thing is with this year, even race by race, you'd think that every weekend Max starts with the target on his back because he's the man to beat. But in fact, when people see him coming up behind, they don't even fight him because he's that good that they know that they'll lose their own race time by putting up a fight. So they kind of, when there is a fight that potentially could be had, a couple of times Norris has basically not put up a big fight because he's thinking, I'm not going to beat him anyway, so take second place, and you can see the logic for it.
It would have been interesting to see what would have happened in Qatar if that race had played out the way it might have done. So if Norris hadn't made the mistakes that he made in qualifying and started on the front row, even thought he might have beaten Verstappen to pole instead of starting 10th. He showed some really good pace in the race, and obviously Verstappen was managing up to a point in the race. But it was a race that was run at a higher percentage level of performance in Qatar than pretty much any race for a long time, because of the imposed tyre limits and the fact that the tyres weren't thermally degrading in the way that they normally do for various technical reasons to do with the tyre and the track. So they were pushing a lot harder, and Norris felt that he might have had a go at challenging Verstappen if they'd started together at the front. But that's one of the few times this year where that's happened. There's been one or two other races where he's been pushed a bit. So Monaco, for example, when Alonso was not too far away from him. Zandvoort, again, similarly. But basically, fundamentally, no one's been close enough to get into that position. And McLaren dropped, or the McLaren drivers, Norris particularly, dropped the ball that weekend when it later became apparent that they might have been in that position. So we've still got to see that yet this year. We may never see it this year, apart from in Singapore, of course. Yeah, it's just been one of those years where one guy and one team were several steps above everybody else.
Alice, are you using onboards of Max Verstappen to help your drivers that you coach to do better behind the wheel?
Yeah, I think they can learn a lot from Max, because he just seems just so calm. Okay, we saw times when he was up against Lewis in 2021 where they both, lost their cool, but he just doesn't seem fazed by anybody else. He can have Lewis Hamilton as a teammate or Alonso as a teammate, and I feel like he'd still be there as confident, and he just focuses on himself and the job that he's got to do. And I think to see him develop sort of from 2021, like Jolene was saying, till now, how he sort of progressed is incredible. And yeah, I mean, what teammate could you put there to challenge Max? It's difficult to say.
Yeah, big question there. So a bit more reflection on Qatar. Of course, the heat, the temperatures, the drivers at the end of that race, watching them get out of the cars, they were pushed to the very limit. But isn't that what we turn up for on a Sunday, to see them being pushed to the limit, or was this too extreme, Andrew?
Well, I went through a bit of a journey during that Grand Prix.
So did we all, Andrew.
I thought the same as you, Rosanna, in the middle of it, thinking, what are they all complaining about, and it's a bit hot. But it turns out, actually, that a lot of them were right up at the sort of upper temperature threshold limit. I'm told that the FIA garage after the race looked like almost like a war zone. They're all lying down trying to recuperate. You don't see that very often. Esteban Ocon didn't actually vomit in his helmet, even though he claimed that he did, but I think he obviously had a bit of a reaction during the race, which wasn't that pleasant for him.
He was sick in his mouth, basically.
Yeah, exactly. He made it sound a little bit more dramatic than it was. But I was speaking to Alex Wirtz, the Grand Prix Drivers Association chairman, about this and the gap between these two races, and he was talking about he felt, and all the drivers collectively felt, they had reached a limit, and there's a number of factors involved, including new race suits that were introduced after Romain Grosjean's fiery crash in Bahrain in 2020. They're much more fire resistant, but they're also much less breathable, perhaps unsurprisingly, and so the drivers are retaining the heat more. Fernando Alonso, I was just talking to him, he was suggesting changing the timings of some of the build up to the race. He was saying it's not right to have the anthem at 15 minutes before the start, because it raises your body temperature at a point where you really don't need it to be raised. And if they had that earlier, then they could keep their body temperature core at a lower level for longer, and maybe that would push back the heat saturation point in the races. But it's something that the drivers and the FIA are going to work on together, because they all feel collectively that the Qatar raised an issue that they weren't really completely aware of before.
Esteban Ocon told me that Stefano Domenicali had messaged all the drivers. They're very much sort of taking into consideration how to go about things next year, Jolien. But for you, did it go too far as a driver? Would you have pushed the button and retired like Logan Sargent?
I'd like to think that you'd persevere, but you never know.
You are a future Ironman, let's not forget.
Yeah, exactly. It's tough as nails, so I'm sure I would have made it through. But it's so difficult to tell. Each driver's going through their own thing. I can't believe, given how many drivers struggle to get out of the car, obviously that's a major safety concern. When drivers are having to be helped out of a car, if they crash the car and they need to be out in a hurry, then they're not going to be jumping out sprightly, are they? So there's an obvious safety concern there, and I think that's why it's sensibly being looked at. But I can't believe, given that, and Lance Stroll saying he was on the edge of consciousness or blacking out in some corners, or dramatic words. There are very few mistakes. When you actually look at the cars going round, they were pretty metronomic.
Yeah, you wouldn't have known, would you?
No, Stroll he went over track limits by inches here or there, and the same with there was a couple of drivers that triggered
help
it.
you with that a little bit because it's not so tight and twisty. It's a bit of
It's high speed. It's very easy to lock a brake and just have a lapse of concentration. When I was driving, if you're finding yourself on the upper limit of temperature in Singapore, was on the calendar obviously when I was racing, and it's a long, tough race, and you have to really have your wits about you. The obvious thing is that you make mistakes from the cockpit when you're on that upper limit and you're starting to work at reduced capacity. I think that's the same in all sport. When you're on the limit in terms of your physical threshold, you'd normally expect to see more mistakes than we actually saw from the drivers operating in Qatar. But then you see them one more lap, they do a slow lap, cool themselves down, or as much as you can in those conditions, but just ease off and get out the car, and they are all, loads of them struggling to get out the car, as you said, Andrew, struggling to stand up, or they all, a lot of them laid down or took a long time out. And you think, how were you just 5 minutes ago nailing it round this track, still with tyres that aren't degrading, hammering it round lap after lap, and no one's gone off, no one's hit a wall, no one's I couldn't see a lock-up. It was amazing.
I think it shows how adrenaline, how powerful that can be. Because, like you said, once you've cooled down, you're on the cool-down lap, you're like, it's over now. And I think when you stop sometimes, it's actually worse because you haven't got that flow going, even though the air was so hot there. But when you stop, it's just so hot.
I've had that. I mean, I'm sure you've had it as well. It's when you're racing in the hot temperatures, and again, Singapore's a classic, brutally hot, such a long race. And then you don't thinking about it so much. Obviously, the drivers in Qatar were having to think about it. It was that level of extreme. But I've had it where you're driving around, the adrenaline's going, you're thinking next corner, next apex, whatever. And then there's a safety car and you think, oh, time to get a breather. Then you just realise, I am drenched.
Yeah, it's so hot.
That is when you're cooling, when you're easing off, that you can really appreciate just how stonkingly hot you are. But there wasn't one. And I'm amazed that they all got through it.
But at the same time, it's not great that Formula 1 drivers are having to be linked up to IV drips. So we had Alex Albon on a drip at the end of the Qatar Grand Prix. Let's hear how he is feeling about things now that he's had a bit of a chance to reflect on that very, very hot race weekend.
For me, it was just pure heat, and the feeling that the heat's not escaping. Normally when you sweat it out and you get some air, you can feel like you're cooling down a little bit, even if it's for one straight and you get a gust of wind and it refreshes your body a little bit. Qatar was like a microwave, and anytime you breathed in, even when you did pit stops, normally that's the time to cool down a little bit. But with the pit stop driving at 80 kilometers an hour, there was zero airflow, and it was even hotter. So stuff like this was just so abnormal to what we're used to. And yeah, I mean, the water that left my body, like just getting out the car, was disgusting. It was like a waterfall. So not nice for the mechanics to clean up, but yeah.
So that was Alex Albon speaking earlier on in the media pen. The other big talking point, of course, well, it happened right at the start of the race. That was the Mercedes drivers coming together. Lewis Hamilton unable to continue, taking full responsibility, which is great, I guess. But we've still got some more races. They're still going to be teammates. So how do we see this one playing out, do you think?
I mean, yeah, that was quite a big mistake, wasn't it, from Lewis? And we've seen it was going to happen because we've seen them get quite close in the previous races. But I think they're grown-ups, they're experienced drivers. They're not going to, well, I'd like to think they're not going to hold a grudge. We saw them hugging and saying, oh, no, and Lewis put his hands up. So I think it'd be very different if Lewis didn't put his hands up and said, no, actually, George, you didn't give me the space.
So do you think actually it's not as bad as it seems? It's because in Japan they nearly came together and then suddenly we got another race where the same thing's happening. If it had happened way back at the beginning of the season and then Qatar had happened, actually it's not such a big deal.
I feel like definitely the rivalry is creeping up between them, and there's a couple of factors in my mind. First of all, last year there was a bit of an offset. Russell started the season really well, then Hamilton got on top once he'd stopped trying to do funky things with the car to get it in a window. And then this year, Lewis has been really, really good in the first half of the year. And actually, when we got to summer break, if you look at the raw stats, it's pretty tough going for George. He was struggling quite a lot. He was in Lewis's shadow a lot of the time. But since the summer break, he's turned it around and he's been really, really strong. And I think sometimes when that happens, Lewis has been on a roll, he's fighting for second in the championship. Suddenly George is there. He was stronger in Singapore, even if the last stint, either of them could have won it. And then again in Japan, they were racing each other hard. And I do just feel like, I think maybe because George had it tougher in the first half of the season, there was a bit of question marks about him, and is this the real gap between Russell and Hamilton? He's managed to prove a point, and we always thought it, I think, when they were teammates together, when they were announced, you've always got the chance when you've got an experienced hand and a new young hot shoe coming through, you've always got the chance that tensions can boil over. And I feel like from the last couple of races, we're starting to see it go up slightly. It's gone from ice cool to tepid or room temperature. So there's a long way to go. But I do think we're starting to see a little bit more tension coming between them. Mercedes did a great job trying to calm things down from a PR point of view, and filming Lewis's apology and all of that was a very sensible move. You didn't think that was just
like a by chance video?
Well, they just happened to follow him out there, and he's got to apologise. Wow. No, they knew what they were doing and they played it well, and so did Lewis. To be honest, he was at fault, and it's great that he put his hands up and said, "Yep, that one's on me," and that does a lot for a driver's relationship. But I see it starting to simmer.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of excitement.
Andrew?
Maybe
It is an interesting dynamic, obviously, because when Russell joined the team, Hamilton was all, well, he's the next generation, I'm going to help him as much as I can. And I think the fact that they've not really been competitive the last 2 years as a team has taken out the tension that might have been there otherwise. If they're competitive next year, it could get really tasty, and I think Toto Wolff's going to have a problem on his hands if that happens, because if they're competing for the World Championship and they're as close in competition as they have been for the last 2 years, because okay, it's ebbed and flowed, but over the balance of a season there's been very little to choose between them. The qualifying stats between them are very close, average pace as well as positions, it's hundredths in it. So there's been ups and downs for both drivers, but overall Russell's done a really impressive job, and he's underlined what everybody already thought about him, which was like star of the future after some of the things he did at Williams. So put them both in a competitive car that can win races against Max Verstappen, and then you've got an extra dynamic in there where they're taking points off each other in the Drivers' Championship potentially. That could give the advantage to Red Bull. All of that, throw that into the mix on top of what is obviously a bit of tension creeping in, as Jolyon says. That could all get really, really interesting next year. So let's just hope that they have got a competitive car.
Could be Spain 2016 all over again, Rosberg, Hamilton. That bad, do you think? Or they'll never let it get that bad again?
Well, you never know. I don't see George filling the Valtteri Bottas role if they have a competitive car. I think he's better. I think he's just generally more competitive. And even if Lewis goes on a run, I don't think George is. I think he's got the talent to stay there and dig in. And so if you have two drivers that are similar on pace and they have a very quick car fighting for wins, then it's normal that you're going to get your elbows out with your teammate. And I think the fact that they've just had it in two races in a row in Japan, Lewis's defence on George was really pretty harsh. I mean, he actually forced him off the road, going off the road himself, which is what Verstappen did to Hamilton back in Brazil. It wasn't quite as egregious as that, but it was a pretty big defence that he put on George, and George actually raced him quite fairly just a few laps before.
That little jink down the straight as well when they're coming into turn one was pretty tasty, wasn't it? Pretty rough from Hamilton, I thought.
Yeah, and it's all these sort of things, and at the time of that, this was in the first phase of the race in Japan. At the time of it, I thought, oh, that's a bit spicy. Lewis defending that hard against his teammate, coming into spoon, and then, as you said, the jink as well, and the way that they were racing pretty hard. But at that point, it was more on Lewis that was actually being, putting the more aggressive moves on. But I thought, okay, they've somehow George is okay with that, and he's not. We didn't hear a team radio complaint or anything. And then fast forward 40 laps, and they're needing to defend from Sainz behind coming through, and then you hear, well, he forced me off the road earlier, so I think it's the last thing, the least that he could do to help me out. And George has banked that he's been forced off there, and he's chalked it up. So these things, you do bank them when you're fighting with your teammate, and you know that you're kidding yourself if you think your teammate's not your biggest rival. you try and play happy families, but it's always there, that comparison, and you want to. It's the guy that you most want to beat in the field. That's just how it is, to show that you're number one, and that you're the direction for the team. So it's normal, but I just see it brewing, simmering, just slowly.
Well, I felt brave earlier. I asked George whether he could trust his teammate when they go wheel to wheel. Here's what he had to say.
Yeah, definitely. I think it meant a lot to hear the apology from Lewis, and the fact that he waited until after the race just to get that chance to say sorry to me face to face meant a lot. And it is challenging when you're approaching a corner at almost 200 miles an hour, and there's centimetres between the cars. It's very close between doing something exceptional to ending up in the gravel and crashing out. But no, we didn't spend long talking about it. We both know where we stand, and we respect and trust one another, and we grow from it.
That was George Russell giving probably the answer you'd expected. After the break, we will talk about some of the rumours swirling around the F1 paddock. We'll talk about the fight for P2 in both the drivers' standings and the Constructors' Championship very shortly. But Andrew, today we learned that the FIA have moved the goalposts slightly when it comes to misdemeanours and bad behaviour. Fines are going up to €1 million.
Yeah, so they've increased at the World Council today. This is the rule-making body for the FIA. They increased the maximum fine that stewards can impose on competitors at a race weekend. This is not like separate things like budget cap fines or Spygate or whatever, where things can go much bigger. But at a race weekend, the stewards can now, it used to be €250,000 they could give maximum. It's gone up to €1 million. Now, the justification the FIA have given for that is that it's 12 years since they looked at those numbers, and the sport's moved on a bit, and it's supposed to act as a deterrent from the most sort of egregious forms of rule breaking, whether they're technical from the team or, I guess, dangerous or competitive wise from the drivers. But the drivers didn't know about this when they went into the press conference first of all today, and so in good old-fashioned media style we did a bit of provoking, and the responses were predictable. It's a huge amount of money. Charles Leclerc said, I've no idea what deserves €1 million penalty. Some drivers are making less money than that. Lewis Hamilton, we do need to be thinking about the message that sends out to those watching. Fernando Alonso later said it sounds not appropriate. It's a sport that's already considered very elite, very closed. When you put big numbers like that, it seems not right.
How do you get to those big numbers? Because when we talk about inflation,
well, it's a hell of an inflation, isn't it? Yeah.
And we talk about cost of living crisis. This is so unrelated. How do you go from $250,000 to $1 million? It's bizarre.
Well, the FIA, as I say, it's not been reassessed. This is their argument. It's not been reassessed for 12 years. Sports moved on. And
so have their Christmas dinners.
And so, well,
turkeys are getting bigger.
Let's go and eat with them.
In their defence, Hamilton said if they're going to fine if they're going to levy those sorts of fines, they need to be thinking about putting them to good causes. And the FIA would say, well, they're already that's where this money already goes. It goes to sort of motorsport development programs. None of us can remember when a €250,000 fine was ever imposed in the past. So I don't think it's that likely on the face of it that €1 million fine is about to be imposed anytime soon. But you are right to point out, and this is obviously the reaction the drivers have had, because other words that have been bandied around were ridiculous, scary, was Daniel Ricciardo's word. On the face of it, it does look like a disproportionate rise and potentially a disproportionate fine, I think the drivers would say.
It is ridiculous, isn't it? I find generally the drivers' fines as an odd punishment in sport anyway.
What's your biggest fine?
I don't know. If I had €1 million fine, I'm having to file for bankruptcy. I'm genuinely. I'll be 1 minute I'm lapping around in Austin, the next minute I'm selling my house.
Where did Jolyon go?
And off I go.
Well,
yeah.
you should give points on the licence. So I think that makes more sense than giving somebody a fine.
That's a sporting penalty for a sporting infringement, and they don't mean to. I mean, we have a few things. Hamilton crossed the track in Qatar and picked up, was it €50,000 fine?
Half those suspended, right? So 25k kicked down the track.
Half suspended, yeah.
Which I guess maybe they would do with the million, but
But look,
Still,
I mean,
haven't got half
Are
a
they
mil in
doing
my
that
pocket.
to make the drivers feel threatened, though?
probably, but Max Verstappen's earning 100 million euros a year, we believe, when you add in his salary to his various sponsorship arrangements and things that he's got going on. Lewis Hamilton's probably around the same sort of amount. €1 million is a lot of money to you and me, Rosanna. We'd be in serious trouble if we got levied that, obviously. But
we could club together,
for
Andrew.
them, it's not that much money for them, actually.
But that shouldn't be the point, though, should it?
But that's exactly the point, Alice.
Yeah.
That is not the point. And I think the point that Alonso and Hamilton are making about the message it sends out about the sport and the amount of money that's swilling around is probably not a particularly positive one for Formula One, you could argue.
No, definitely not. Right, back to the championships, because I think we all know where we stand on that €1 million headline. P2, drivers. Perez, if he doesn't get it, what's happening? I mean, there have been weird rumours circulating about retirement. Why would you retire before your home race? All those sort of
I don't think it will be before Mexico.
Well, hopefully not.
The theory is it might be at the end of the year. So the theory that's going around about Perez is that he's been trampled all over by Max Verstappen this year. It's not good for a Red Bull. If the field's more competitive next year, they can't afford a second driver performing with this sort of margin to Verstappen, because in the championship it's not going to help them. So they might need to make some changes, maybe give him an easy route out by saying he's going to retire. And so it looks like it's his decision. It has to be said, there's no evidence for this
And
at
he
all.
said no.
He said no. He's got a contract to the end of 2024. So we can only treat it as rumours for now, and rumours are sometimes true, they're sometimes not. It has to be said, though, that if he carries on performing like this through next year, assuming he stays for next year, he probably won't be getting a new contract for after that. So it's only a question of when that decision is made, I think, not if that decision is made.
And of course, he's going up against Lewis Hamilton for P2 in the standings. Do you think Lewis has got what it takes, or has the Mercedes got what it takes to deliver him that position?
Yeah, I think they have. They don't crash into each other like last time out. But yeah, Perez just seems to be straight. And then with the track limits that he was getting in Qatar, you know, it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, just stay in between the white lines, because it's harder than that, obviously. But you know, that was just his season in a nutshell, wasn't it? Really, all those track limits that he was getting last time out. And yeah, I think Hamilton can beat him. You know, I think he definitely can.
The problem Perez has got is he's making one of the best Grand Prix cars that's ever been built look bang average a lot of the time, and he shouldn't be in the position where he was under threat for a second place in the championship from Alonso earlier in the year, and now under threat from Hamilton. He simply shouldn't be. And Jolyon, I don't know what your take on that as to how he's found himself in that situation is.
30 points ahead of Lewis now.
And he's only picked up 5 points in the last 3 Grand Prix. And that includes the sprint as well, so 3 Grand Prix and a sprint. He's picked up 5 points. Yeah, definitely Hamilton can do it, and that's amazing considering the Mercedes deficit to the Red Bull. I feel like Perez's relationship with Red Bull is broken down at this point. And speaking to Christian Horner, he'll never say particularly negative things about his driver, but it's the way that he says things about Checo, and this has been happening since the summer break, or before the summer break, when Perez couldn't make Q3 for 5 races in a row in the car that Verstappen was taking pole position comfortably in. And then I remember speaking to him in Austria, speaking to Christian Horner, and Perez was out in Q2 because he didn't get a single lap in, again with track limits, and you could tell the frustration was there for Horner. And now we're getting to the position where Verstappen's won the championship, Red Bull have won the championship. The only thing they've got is for Perez to pick up some more points and take second and have 1-2 and clean sweep everything. But Checo's head just looks like it's not in the right place. The driving errors that he's making now are kind of a lot of the time. Some of the racecraft that he's showing is not the Perez that I've known from the last 10 years plus.
Christian's saying that they support him, but Perez having to go back to the Red Bull factory in the last week or so after Qatar to sort of go over everything and saying that the direction they've been taking is wrong. That's just not what you expect to hear from a championship winning outfit.
They can't turn around and say, no, we don't support him.
No.
They just can't say that. And I think, as Jolyon said...
You don't need to say it.
Yeah,
you don't need to say that particular
I think,
phrase.
as Jolyon said, like, it's not the Perez we know. No, he's a race winner. He's had some great races throughout the year. But I think it boils down to he's just lost his... And we've all been there, you know, in sport. the mental side of things is so critical, and he's just totally lost his way with it. He's just struggling mentally against Max, and he's just ended up going in a downward spiral.
It's interesting, the Perez story, though, at Red Bull, because he came in having... he replaced Albon, who replaced Gasly, and both of those guys underperformed at Red Bull. And they were both considered reasonable prospects, got promoted to go alongside Max, and neither lasted the test of time, really. Perez was an improvement on both of those two, even if there was still a deficit. The start of this year, he looked really accomplished in the first handful of races, won a couple of them. There was the one time we thought, some people thought that there might be a level of fight in the championship. It was because Perez turned up. But now he's drifted away, and he's so far adrift of Max. There's actually the biggest gulf now between Verstappen and either of those previous teammates. But I'm looking at Albon now. He's thriving at Williams.
So he's the one you put in the seat?
Well, no.
Oh.
I'm looking at Gasly, who's doing a solid job at Alpine as well. And these guys, they've actually recovering their careers really nicely. And I just think Checo actually, maybe for his own sanity at this point, needs to leave Red Bull and just maybe have a probably less fruitful in terms of peak results, but in terms of his whole demeanour, his happiness, and the confidence he has within a team. If he went to a Aston Martin, for example, or another team, he used to drive for the equivalent of Aston Martin, Racing Point, then maybe for him he'd actually have a happier time, a bit like Bottas leaving Mercedes, where he was more competitive and the team actually were probably more supportive of him than Red Bull are for Perez. But he seems to be thriving a little bit at Alfa Romeo, even if not results, but in terms of his own satisfaction.
So if Perez does retire at the end of this year, who are you putting in that seat? Because we've got Daniel Ricciardo back in this weekend. His hand is fixed. Liam Lawson knocking about. Andrew,
I don't think he's going to retire at the end of this year. That's my take on it. But I think the question is more, who do Red Bull replace him with at the end of next year, assuming that's the decision that they make. And I think, I was talking to some people about this morning, I think one potential option for them is Lando Norris. He's friends with Max Verstappen. I don't think the situation between Norris and Piastri looks that comfortable at the moment. Norris has been a bit, he's been very down. He was very down on himself in Qatar. He didn't like the fact that it was Piastri who got the first pole position. It wasn't a Grand Prix pole, it was a sprint pole, but still. And Norris felt it should have been him, but he made the mistakes. Why did he make the mistakes? Was it because Piastri's quick and putting him under pressure? He's a rookie. He shouldn't be, and he might be thinking, I shouldn't be being put in this position by a rookie. Piastri signed a new contract to the end of 2026. Norris only goes to 2025. This is all speculation, but you could see a situation where Norris thinks, do you know what? Maybe I might want to try my hand somewhere else. And it's Red Bull. How could you turn down an Adrian Newey car? And Red Bull have always expressed interest in Norris. So I think that's one to keep an eye on. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It's just one that might be bubbling under a bit.
And friends quickly become enemies, though. That's the only worry with that. You might get on with Max off track, but suddenly when you're teammates...
Well, anyone going into that situation is going to face the I've got to beat Max Verstappen thing. But they all go in thinking they're going to, and Norris is another level of driver altogether than Perez, so I think he would put up a much better showing.
I think anyone might be just a bit scared to go into Red Bull now alongside Verstappen, because Verstappen is incredibly good. I'm sure he's operating at the best level of anyone out there right now, but also whatever has been going on with the car, it seems to be really suiting him. And Perez is really not a shabby driver, but he's being made to look really poor at the moment. Same with Albon. You rank the drivers right now this year on who's done a great job. Most people put Albon in the top half. They look really average compared to Verstappen. So even Norris, I rate as one of the best out there. So he's got a lot of confidence. He's still, even if the Piastri's putting him under a lot of pressure in qualifying now, he's got another step to make in terms of race pace, which is what Lando's got definitely over him. And on a Sunday, I'd still say Lando's got a significant edge. But, Piastri's a rookie. He might learn this and become a more rounded package. But then if you're being beaten by Piastri, or if that's really close, do you want to go into the Lion's Den and take on Verstappen in a Red Bull? You look at all his predecessors and...
You wouldn't be scared, Jolien, would you?
We'd all be scared.
I'd be fearless, and then I'd be out of a job after 3 races, Rosanna.
Back here with us.
And
Hallelujah.
I picked up €1 million fine in the process and declared bankruptcy.
John, I think Lawson. I think I'd like to see Lawson in the seat.
In the Red Bull.
In the Red Bull, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, he's done a good job against Yuki. I mean, some people will say, well, it's just Yuki. But, yeah, it's going to be hard. Who else are you going to put in there? Who else is going to want to do it? And
a young, hungry driver.
So the interesting thing for me is the way that Red Bull have got themselves in with AlphaTauri as well. I don't see any driver being in a position to usefully step into that Red Bull seat, assuming they don't continue with Perez at the end of next year, because Ricciardo's their best hope, and if Daniel Ricciardo comes back for this weekend, and if he starts looking like the Ricciardo of old, then it's a no-brainer. But
would he want to do that?
He would. Oh, surely he would to get back to the Red Bull.
He and
that's
Max
why
did
he's
not have a good relationship.
No, but that's why he's here. He's here to get back in the Red Bull and try and
razz him up.
He'll probably play second fiddle to Max, and he'd probably be happy with that at this stage of his career as well. So I see Daniel as an option, but he did a couple of races before he broke his metacarpal. And he didn't look a huge amount better than Liam Lawson, who was a rookie, came in without testing the car at all, without ever racing a Formula One car, did some of the toughest Grand Prix and looked accomplished. So,
well, maybe Red Bull will just run one car because they can win it anyway.
They can win it anyway, yeah, maybe.
We'll have a rule change.
Rosanna, we'll all take turns. You go first.
Oh my goodness, no. Okay, so we've got Mercedes and Ferrari battling out in the Constructors' Championship, 28 points between them. So still lots to look out for, and as we said, still an exciting sport right till the very end, isn't it, Andrew?
Well, there's another constructors fight as well, which is over fourth, because you've got Aston Martin in it at the moment with basically a one-car team, and McLaren coming up fast behind them with both drivers scoring big results in what's now, since the second half of the season started, is clearly the second fastest car on the grid, definitely in qualifying. It's a bit closer in the races between them, Mercedes and Ferrari. But so I think Aston Martin looked very vulnerable. I can't remember what the points gap is.
It's 11.
11. So I think Alonso on his own in a slower car, I don't think he's going to hold off two McLaren drivers in a quicker car for 5 races with just 11-point margin.
Yeah.
It's not really a battle, is it, that one? The battle might be even
Got
for
Alfa Romeo
Ferrari.
and Haas.
Alice, you want to
to
keep
really-
further down.
We're grabbing straws there.
Well, look, plenty to come this weekend in Austin, Texas. Now, are we going for Mexican tonight, Andrew, or barbecue, or?
Well, I was designated as social secretary, which
It's a no-brainer for us.
It's been imposed on me, and I was told it was going to be Mexican. So yeah, we're going Mexican.
Well, Mexican
Red
it
River
is.
and 8th.
Will that also be who's on the top step of the podium? We'll leave it there. Who knows? We've got 2 podiums, of course. Sprint and race. I'm playing Perez, Jolene. Look at me like
Only one of them's a podium,
marbles.
Rosanna.
Oh,
get a
don't
medal
get into
for the other one.
vernacular of
It's a sprint number 5 now. You get a medal and a pat on the back, and you get 8 points.
No wreath anymore. No wreath. Oh, goodness me. Right, time to head out into our fabulous car. Jolene at the helm of our pickup truck. You ready to take us home back to central downtown Austin?
Yep.
Ready and waiting. Right, start your engines. Join us over the course of the weekend. We will be here with all the reaction, the live commentary and the analysis from Andrew Benson, Alice Powell, Jolene Palmer and me, Rosanna Tennant. It is goodbye. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.